David sat at his worn-out wooden desk, staring at the stack of bills that seemed to grow taller with each passing week. His dorm room was little more than 4 walls of peeling paint, a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling, and a mattress that had long since lost its comfort. At 24, he should have been enjoying life, studying with ambition, or laughing with friends. Instead, he felt trapped in a cycle of endless part-time jobs, ramen noodles for dinner, and the constant fear of eviction. His scholarship barely covered tuition, and everything else was a burden he carried alone. His phone buzzed with a reminder of overdue payments, and he rubbed his tired eyes, whispering to himself, there has to be a way out. That evening, fate pulled him somewhere unexpected. One of his shifts was at a charity gala hosted at one of the city's most luxurious hotels. The chandeliers sparkled like constellations, polished marble floors reflected golden light, and guests arrived in designer gowns and tailored suits. David, dressed in a simple black uniform, blended into the background, balancing trays of champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. He wasn't supposed to talk, wasn't supposed to stand still too long, just serve and disappear like a shadow. But even as he tried to keep his head down, he couldn't help but marvel at the wealth surrounding him. Every laugh, every clink of a crystal glass, every diamond necklace reminded him of what he didn't have and what he desperately wanted. And then he saw her. Eleanor. She entered the room with a presence that silenced even the loudest conversations. At 71, she wasn't the fragile old woman one might imagine. She carried herself with dignity and power, her posture straight, her chin slightly raised as if she were accustomed to being admired. Her silver hair was styled elegantly, cascading down her shoulders like silk, and her emerald gown shimmered under the light. Around her neck hung a necklace of rare sapphires, each stone worth more than David could earn in a lifetime. Guests rushed to greet her, whispers following her every step. That's Eleanor Hayes, someone muttered near David. The widow of Richard Hayes, the oil magnate. They say she's worth hundreds of millions. David tried to focus on his job, but his eyes kept wandering back to her. She exuded something he couldn't name, something magnetic that pulled him closer without permission. As the night wore on, David found himself serving drinks near her table. Eleanor's eyes, sharp and knowing, caught his. For a brief second, it felt like she could see straight through him, peeling back the layers of his poverty, his hunger, his ambition. He quickly looked away, cheeks burning. But then her voice, smooth and commanding, called out, "Young man, another glass, please." His hands trembled slightly as he poured her champagne. She smiled faintly, studying him as if he were more than just a server. "You're new here," she said softly, though her words carried authority. "What's your name?" "David, ma'am," he answered, trying to keep his tone respectful. "David," she repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "You don't belong in the shadows. I can see it in your eyes." Her words startled him. He had always been invisible to the wealthy, a tool to be used and forgotten. Yet here she was, noticing him, pulling him into her world even with something as simple as a comment. Throughout the night, Eleanor's attention returned to him. She asked him small questions, about his studies, his future, his family. He admitted he was alone, struggling, trying to finish college but drowning in debt. She listened carefully, nodding, her gaze never wavering. When she laughed, it was soft but genuine, and David felt a strange warmth in her presence. By the end of the gala, while the last of the guests drifted out, Eleanor approached him once more. "David," she said, her voice low but firm, "I like your honesty. Most people here wear masks, pretending to be something they're not. You, however, are unpolished but real. That is rare." He didn't know how to respond, but before he could, she handed him a small, embossed card. Her name was written elegantly in gold. "Come to my estate tomorrow evening," she said. "I host private dinners. You'll find the address there." When she walked away, David stood frozen, clutching the card as if it were a ticket to another universe. His coworkers whispered behind his back, their voices dripping with envy and suspicion. Why would she invite him? What does she see in him? But David didn't care. All he knew was that something had shifted in his life. That night, lying awake in his tiny room, the card glowed on his desk like a beacon. He thought about Eleanor, her wealth, her power, her eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness inside him. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of hope, mixed with curiosity and an unsettling sense of danger. Could she really change his life? Or was this the beginning of something he wasn't prepared for? He didn't know yet. But deep down, he already sensed that this encounter would alter his fate forever. The wedding happened faster than anyone expected. David barely had time to process what was unfolding before he found himself standing in a grand hall, surrounded by glittering chandeliers, marble floors, and hundreds of strangers whose eyes followed him with suspicion and curiosity. Eleanor stood beside him, radiant in her ivory gown, her silver hair gleaming under the soft lights. The contrast between them was stark: her age, her wealth, her commanding aura, and him, a young student in a perfectly tailored suit that still couldn't hide his nervousness. Whispers rippled through the guests like waves. He's just a boy. She could be his grandmother. He's after her fortune. David tried to block them out, keeping his gaze fixed on Eleanor, reminding himself that this was his chance, his escape from the cycle of poverty. The ceremony was lavish, and though David said the vows with trembling lips, Eleanor spoke hers with calm conviction. When she slipped the heavy gold ring onto his finger, he felt both the weight of commitment and the dizzying reality of the life he was stepping into. Cameras flashed, applause followed, and in that moment, David told himself he had made the right decision. He was now the husband of one of the richest women in the city. The honeymoon was not the dream he had imagined as a child. Instead of beaches or candlelit evenings, Eleanor led him into her world of business and legacy. They stayed at her sprawling estate, a mansion so vast it took David hours to explore. Every corridor was filled with art, antiques, and secrets he didn't dare to uncover. Eleanor explained that her fortune was not only in money but also in companies, properties, and investments. "If you are to be my husband, David," she said one evening over dinner, her voice sharp yet calm, "you must learn responsibility. This isn't about luxury alone, it's about carrying my name forward." He nodded, unsure of what that truly meant, but eager to please her. Each day she handed him documents, contracts, and instructions. She walked him through her offices, introduced him to her lawyers and advisors, and watched closely to see if he paid attention. At times, David felt overwhelmed, as if he were a pawn being carefully moved across a board he didn't understand. Yet the lure of wealth, the taste of power, kept him anchored. He told himself he was learning, preparing for a future he could never have imagined in his dorm room. At night, though, the reality pressed heavier on him. The mansion felt too quiet, too vast, and Eleanor's presence, though gentle in some moments, carried an intensity that unsettled him. Her eyes lingered on him longer than necessary, as if she were measuring him, testing him. He pushed those thoughts aside, convincing himself it was only his nerves adjusting to a new life. For the first 6 days, everything seemed like a surreal dream: lavish meals, luxury cars waiting at his command, and servants who bowed when he entered a room. But on the 7th day, something shifted, and David would soon discover that his new life was not as simple as riches and security. It was the beginning of a truth darker than anything he had ever imagined. On the 7th morning, David woke earlier than usual, the silence of the mansion pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. He had grown accustomed to the grandeur of Eleanor's world, the sweeping staircases, the endless hallways, the smell of polished wood and roses drifting through the air. But that morning, something gnawed at him, an itch of curiosity he couldn't shake. Eleanor was still asleep in her wing of the house, and the staff had not yet begun their daily routines. For once, the estate felt abandoned, as though it belonged only to him. He wandered through corridors he had never fully explored, letting his fingers trace the ornate wallpaper and carved wooden panels. At the far end of the west wing, he noticed a door unlike the others. It was heavier, darker, with a brass handle dulled by age. He remembered Eleanor's words from their second night together: "This part of the house is off limits. Promise me you won't enter." At the time, he had agreed without question, but now, standing before it, his heart raced with both fear and temptation. The door was locked, but not tightly. With a hesitant push, the latch clicked, and it opened with a creak that echoed down the empty hall. The room beyond was dim, the curtains drawn, a layer of dust thick on the air. David stepped inside and froze. Lining the walls were portraits, dozens of them, each framed in heavy gold. His breath caught as he studied them more closely. The faces staring back at him were men, young, handsome, dressed in suits, men not unlike himself. He moved from one painting to the next, a chill crawling up his spine. Beneath each portrait was a small plaque with 2 dates, a marriage date and a death date. His chest tightened when he realized the pattern. Every man had married Eleanor, and every man had died, within weeks or months of their wedding. David's hands began to tremble. He stepped back, his mind racing. He had heard whispers during their wedding, the cruel gossip of strangers, but he had dismissed it as envy. Now he couldn't ignore the evidence staring at him from the walls. Eleanor wasn't just a wealthy widow, she was a woman with a past that devoured her husbands one by one. The silence of the room pressed against him, suffocating. He thought of the way Eleanor looked at him, the intensity in her eyes, the way she had tied him to her legacy so quickly. He had believed he was special, chosen. But what if he was simply next? Panic surged through him as he backed toward the door. His mind screamed at him to run, to leave the mansion, to escape before it was too late. But another part of him, darker and colder, whispered that it was already too late, that once you entered Eleanor's world, there was no way out. That evening, David could barely eat. His hands shook as he tried to lift his fork, and every sound in the dining hall seemed amplified. The clinking of silverware, the crackle of the fireplace, Eleanor's calm breathing as she sipped her wine. He couldn't stop thinking about the room, about the portraits of the men who came before him, each with dates that ended far too soon. He felt Eleanor's gaze lingering on him, sharp and knowing, and he lowered his eyes, afraid she might read his thoughts. When the meal ended, Eleanor set down her glass and rose from her chair, gliding toward him with a grace that seemed almost predatory. She stopped at the doorway, her silhouette framed by the golden glow of the chandelier. "You've been exploring," she said softly, her tone calm but heavy with meaning. David's heart froze. He swallowed hard, trying to deny it, but the words caught in his throat. Eleanor stepped closer, her lips curving into a faint smile that did not reach her eyes. "Curiosity," she whispered, "is dangerous, my dear." His breath quickened. What happened to them?" He managed to ask, his voice breaking. "The men in the portraits, your husbands. Why are they all gone?" Eleanor tilted her head, studying him like a scientist might study a specimen. For a moment, the room was silent except for the steady ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Then she laughed, low, elegant, and chilling. "They were weak," she said, as though it were the simplest explanation in the world. "They wanted the riches, the luxury, the name. But they could not bear the weight of my love, or my secrets." Her words sliced through him, and David felt his knees weaken. She walked past him and placed a folded document on the table. His eyes darted to it, and when he saw what it was, his stomach lurched. A will. His name was written clearly at the top, naming him as the sole heir to her vast fortune. For a brief second, his heart flickered with hope, until his eyes dropped to the final line, effective upon death. The meaning hit him like ice water. He wasn't meant to enjoy her wealth. He was meant to inherit it the moment his life was snuffed out. David's pulse hammered in his ears. He stumbled back, shaking his head. "No," he whispered. "No, this isn't." Eleanor's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with something both cruel and mesmerizing. She raised her glass of wine, as though toasting his realization. "Every man thinks he can outlast me, David. But the truth is, you're already mine." Fear surged through him, raw and unrelenting. He felt trapped, the walls of the mansion closing in, the portraits of the dead husbands silently watching. He had a choice now: stay and risk becoming another name etched in gold beneath a painted face, or run into the night and leave behind the fortune he once thought would save him. The clock struck midnight, its chime echoing through the silent halls, and David realized his time was running out.